Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Ohio University Southern's Campus Conversation with Yi-Ting Wang. So recent events have highlighted the history of racism in American culture. So the Ohio University Southern Council on Diversity and Inclusion launched Campus Conversations, a monthly series of virtual conversations. Campus Conversations inspires collective action by bringing people together to learn, share experiences, and ask questions. The series looks at race, ethnicity, and culture from various angles. We won't solve the world's issues in an hour, but together we can start moving forward. Today we welcome Yi-Ting Wang, who has lived in Athens, Ohio since 2004. She works at the Academic Achievement Center at Ohio University Athens campus and serves as the advisor for the Ohio University Asian American and Pacific Islander Student Union. She organized the Stop Asian Hate rally in Athens, Ohio in March of 2021. She is also the vice president of Athens Asian American Alliance, an organization committed to community service and social justice, to provide support and increase belonging for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, or AAPI, heritage in the region. Athens Asian American Alliance is currently engaged in a community oral history project to document and preserve Asian American presence and contributions in Southeast Ohio. We are recording this session, and we ask that you keep your mics muted. You may use your video if your bandwidth allows. And we will now welcome Yi-Ting Wang.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I look like we have a fewer people today, and I could be a little bit more relaxed. First of all, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to Robert and Eric for inviting me to be here today. I'm very excited, but I also feel very humbled. I work at the Academic Achievement Center to provide academic support to graduate students, but my expertise is not in this area. But previously in my career, I was a Fulbright scholar studying multicultural issues in graduate school at Duke University, and I'm also an alumni at Cornell University School of Theory and Criticism. So today I'm just here to share some information and experiences and to learn with and from all of you. Even though I have been active in my community in Athens and I'm currently in leadership Athens County cohort, it in fact has been a long journey for me to come to be involved with Asian American community organizing. So please bear with me a bit that I'm going to talk about my personal journey of how I have become Asian American today. And from that, I want to talk about the stereotypes and the microaggressions and the situations and the experiences of many Asian Americans are facing. So my experience, of course, is in no way representative of the whole Asian American experience. Particularly, it's very different from those of students who were born in the US or come to this country at a very young age, or they're second or third generation individuals. That's why we have learned a lot in our oral history project, that it's so fascinating to hear all these different type of Asian American stories. So I have lived in this country for 22 years, so I probably covered the part of having been a new immigrant as well as those who have naturalized for a number of years. Just like many first generation immigrants ahead of me, in a few years, the portion of my life spent in the US will be longer than the time I had in my country of birth. Part of the reasons that I'm here today is also that I want my children or grandchildren to not to be told, go back to your country at school, and to have more equal access to opportunities, employment, and public services such as police protection, healthcare, and the court system. The first time I heard about the word Asian American was when I was in college and graduate school in Taiwan in the 90s. As an English, where we call foreign language major, I had taken courses called Asian American literature. And we read classic Asian American, mostly Chinese American novels such as Maxine Hong Kingston's The Woman Warrior, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, and Gish Jin's Typical American, etc. The field of Asian American cultural productions have grown a lot in the past 20 years, and there are way more things to be read for readers of all age now. I hope you will read more work by Asian American authors, not just for diversifying your reading, but also for the pure pleasure that you just know when you encounter a great story or a piece of good writing. Speaking of Asian American studies, I am curious, how many courses related to Asian Americans have been or are currently offered at Ohio University? Does anyone here know? Well, if you have taken or taught courses that touch upon Asian American experience or situations, please, I would encourage you, and please feel free to put them in the chat so many people can share about these resources. According to the Pew Research Center, Asian Americans are the fastest growing group in the US. From 2011 to 2019, the Asian American population climbed from about 18.2 million to 23.2 million, according to the US Census. I can probably like share my PowerPoint here. Okay, all right. So here I got I got the cherry blossoms, which is an important part and a symbol of our Athens campus. And there is a story involving partnership with Japan's Chubu University brought about by our Japanese American professors in the university. And I hope that story could be told more, and not just within the university, but whoever visits Athens, Ohio could go to the museums or see that and understand that contribution of Japanese Americans that has brought to our town. So in these pictures, you can see that Asian American is a very, very diverse group. It has people from all origins. So, and that definitely leads to the terms, because right now we talk about AAPI, which is Asian American and Pacific Islanders. And this term was actually coined by the Congress together when they started AAPI, Asian American and Pacific Islander History Month. And oh yeah, okay. Oh, you can see the picture? Oh, okay, sorry about that. Okay. Thank you for the reminder. Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah. So the term Asian Americans definitely means that people whose heritage or who are from the Asian countries. And then for the Pacific Islanders, that is a little bit tricky. Usually it means like people from Guam, Hawaii, and Samoa. And then the AAPI would include all of these. And it's kind of like a pan-Asian identity, but it's also throwing everybody into the same categories. And there could be a lot of confusions. For instance, are Filipino Americans Asian Americans, or they're Pacific Islanders? And also, when we throw Pacific Islanders into the whole label of AAPI, are we like, erase their identity under being together with Asian Americans? So I would suggest that when this comes to this question, probably just ask people how they would prefer to be identified. For instance, I personally am Taiwanese American. I think I'm Asian American, but in the meantime, definitely most Taiwanese do have like some kind of Pacific Islander genes in them. So I would just say ask people how they would like to be identified. And here we can see a couple numbers, like exactly how many. Oh, sorry about that. Give me 1 second. Okay, exactly how many people are in terms of just some basic demographic information. So it's about 23 million, 5.4. And then, oh, okay. Sorry, I have to come back here. All right, this is not showing. Okay. I'm sorry that it was not showing. All right, okay. Sorry about that. But you can find this chart in the equitable growth about on the distributions of the populations into different categories, and also about where people come from, and then the percentage. I'm so sorry about that. It was working like a couple minutes ago. Okay, all right. So Asian American populations climbed from 18.2 million to 23.2 million people according to the US Census from 2011 to 2019. And this is an increase. I will just stop sharing it. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. This is an increase of 27%, while the US population as a whole grows about at 5%. And currently, more Asian Americans are at West Coast, but actually the recent increase are actually increased the most in places like Indiana and also places like West Virginia, where the population were actually in decline, but the Asian American population are growing. And so I'm hoping, like, since we're so close to West Virginia, that it will be something that you notice that it's around us. So it's not just something in the East Coast or in the West Coast. So this is pretty significant, and it might have economic and political implications in the future. And considering the fact that there are roughly 50 ethnic groups with roots in more than 40 countries, there are a lot of room to grow. There should be no surprise. Okay. And as Ohio University students come from all over the state and the country, and they will find work across the nation upon graduation. The university should really make efforts to make its course offering more inclusive, to reflect the national demographic trend, as well as to prepare our students to work and live in this country composed of diverse population. So that said, I first came to this country in pursuit of a PhD in English. Specifically, I studied cultural production related to abolitionist movement in 18th century British and early American literature. So afterwards, when I settled in Ohio, I think I ended up at the right place. But so at that time, as I come from a small island with very few natural resources to rely on, and all you have is manpower, it is of crucial importance to learn about other countries, their people, and their past and present. I had aspired to come to the US to get my PhD and return to Taiwan to help Taiwanese students understand better that the US is a multicultural society, so that they won't unconsciously or consciously say something antiquated or discriminatory that they pick up from popular culture, Hollywood movies, or earlier English language literature. However, when I arrived at Duke University, more than once, out of good intention, I was told maybe I should switch my research topic to Asian American studies. One day when I heard that again, I just don't know where I found the courage to tell the person, does my research topic have to correspond to my biological identity? I even said, I do not feel comfortable doing Asian American studies to become a person speaking for Asian Americans when I do not share many experiences. Well, so now looking back, I had said that too early. I didn't realize and couldn't foresee that several years later, life happened and I became a mother of 2 Asian Americans. So that was when I first started to feel that I better learn something about the situations and the challenges facing Asian American kids and Asian American families. And just like that, one by one, you start to hear kids come home and say, people say my lunchbox smells. Can I go to the grocery with you and pick my own lunch? So when my first child was having some trouble doing math word problems, I went to the teacher-parent conference and asked some advice, like how I could help my kid to feel more confident about doing word problem. I had expected to get answers like, oh, read the problem out loud, break the problems down into steps, but instead, out of good intention again, I was told, Asian kids often have trouble with word problems at this stage. If you drill your kids too much at home, they would think math means arithmetic and word problems will be hard because they require thinking in multiple steps. Oh well, by this point, I think you're aware I am incapable of raising kids that fit into the stereotype of math with kids. Well, my kids prefer sociology and history to STEM subjects, and they don't play any music instruments. So while just as they can be some math with kids, I seem to be like an inefficient tiger mom, though it was not often perceived so. As I was an active parent and care about education in our school district, it seems that when I opened my mouth, people seem to have heard the tiger mom roaring. When I was involved in advocating for updating our K-12 school infrastructure, the opposing side actually dubbed my wishes for having better school facilities for all the kids in our school district, which very few are minorities, as I wanted to build a shiny Chinese school. My children also often felt very insulted when people implied to them that they have a tiger mom, as if they were robotic kids lacking their own agency, or their achievements were not out of their own initiatives and aspirations. As COVID-19 broke out due to the large infection were first reported in China and was dubbed in terms such as Kung Fu flu, the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino, compared data from the first quarter of 2021 to the same period in 2020. They found the hate crime surged by 169%. That was quite daunting. It's like suddenly your life no longer feels safe, but you know, that's actually a normal probably for many people in this country. In many cases, people were attacked were not even of Chinese descent. They were attacked just because of how they look. And after the Atlanta shooting in March 16, 2021, Captain Jay Baker said that Robert Aaron Long, the perpetrator, was just having a bad day. That actually sounds too familiar for parents with kids of color. Often kids at school get teased and teased again, and when they act it out, they become the troublemakers, while the kids who tease them or are just being naughty or dealing with their own issues. So after that, I joined a few students and organized the Stop Asian Hate rally in Athens in March 27, 2021. We were grateful that it was greatly supported by many community members. And that said, I feel like our community, while our community was being very supportive and it's very peaceful, our kids are still suffering a lot of microaggressions at school. And overall, if you look at the statistic, the state of Ohio has a very low report rate about Asian hate crime, and that has a lot to do with several factors. The Columbus Dispatch has an article saying that a lot of Asian immigrants are coming from former authoritarian countries, that they may not feel comfortable with reporting things to the official. There is a distrust of the institution over there as well. And then in the meantime, going to the police could be very scary. And to alleviate the situation, maybe diversifying the police force and increasing community outreach would probably help the Asian Americans to report more and more cases when they encounter microaggressions or attacks. In fact, I just dealt with a kid being attacked under his eyes a couple of days ago. So I think I have covered a few stereotypes and the microaggressions that Asian Americans, families, and kids often face at school. These are deeply related to the history of Asian Americans in this country. Asian Americans have been in this country since the 18th century, with Filipino establishing a small settlement in the bayous of Louisiana and Chinese arriving in Hawaii and married Native and Hawaiian women, because at that time you don't really have like women coming along yet. In the 19th century, more Chinese and Japanese arrived as sailors, merchants, students, and farmers. In 1865, the Central Pacific Road Company recruits Chinese workers for the Transcontinental Railroad from California to Utah. Many are killed or injured in a very harsh working condition, trying to go through the mountain terrains. As Chinese workers at that time took lower wages and worked long hours, like all the immigrants that arrived later, than the earlier groups always did and have to face, there were like anti-Chinese labor movement organized, and ultimately it accumulated to denaturalization of Chinese immigrant in 1878, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. In this period, Chinese were the first illegal immigrants after they become denaturalized. And as they were stripped of their citizenship, they lost their properties as well. Or people could not return to the country and got detained in Angel Island, and that left their families separated from them. Nor could their children go to public school anymore, and segregated school has to be founded. Without citizenship status for protection, later in 1885-7, there were massacres of Chinese miners out in Rock Spring, Wyoming, and Snake River, Oregon. Into the 20th century, after Japan's attack of Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans volunteered to join the U.S. Army to fight for America, while their Japanese American families were sent to internment camps in remote areas. Early Asian American histories sorry, it's really hard to talk about this. Early American history before the 21st century have included denaturalization, segregation, separation of families, massacres, concentration camp. Things that unfortunately, some of the things we're still seeing repeating this history just for other people. And honestly, we don't know when it might repeat again back to us. So, but I don't want to dwell too much on the history part because the nature of the diversity of the Asian American group. So it's really, today I tend to focus a little bit more on Chinese American history, and I apologize that I did not cover as much as like Filipino, Japanese, and Korean American histories due to the space. So I would highly suggest you watch PBS documentary Asian Americans. That there are 5 episodes and about 5 hours, but it does encompasses many aspects. So we need to be aware that this past to understand the present for Asian Americans and Asian American movements in the 70s, 90s, and the recent Stop Asian Hate movement. Asian Americans are not always the highly educated, highly skilled, with the highest average income among the cultural groups in the US. Well, the data said that only because it is aggregated. Just it's again the big umbrella, the big pan-Asian identity has covered up all the vast socioeconomic differences within the groups. So let me see if I could share my slides again. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, now I think I make it work now. Okay. Okay, so we can see the earlier picture that did not show is that you can see that the percentage of the Asian American demography is here is about like, you know, white is about this much and the Asian Americans about 5% here. And then next, okay. And then these are all the groups that was under this Pan-Asian identity. See, it even take 4 rows. And currently the key composition group is about Chinese have 24%, Indian has 21%, Filipinos and Vietnamese, Korean, and all the others. So we actually have a very strong Bhutanese community in Columbus, Ohio. So yeah, we need to be always mindful of the many small minority groups within the Asian American communities. So here is what I was trying to say earlier. What does it mean to say that Asian Americans are the highest income, best educated, and fast growing racial groups in the United States? So if we see the income level, if we see the put the aggregated and deaggregated data together, you can see that the income level are actually highly variable, and there are a lot of things that are invisible in the aggregated data. So you can see that here the income level could be this much because a lot of Southeast Asian and Asian immigrants that come from after the war, running away from communism, the refugees definitely come from a very different situation from people who come here to study. And here you can also see about the aggregated AAPI data provides a skewed story about educational attainment. So here's the aggregated, and then when you see it deaggregated, you can see actually a lot of Asian Americans go to public 2-year institute education, higher education institute. And then if you look at the test scores, these are from the College Board. Yeah, and you will see that it is still more follow the social economic trend rather than related to race. So here there's a story about this diversity situation within Asian Americans community, and I would like just to share with everyone. Please bear with me to read it. Growing up in Ohio as a child of Korean immigrants, I had a narrow view of who Asian Americans were. I grew up in a relatively affluent suburb, and most of my Asian American friends were the children of similarly well-educated immigrants. Although my sister and I were among the only Asian in our elementary school, by high school, my advancement placement classes were about 1/4 Asian, quite a bit considering that Asian Americans were probably only 5% of the school district. Most years, my high school sent a kid to Harvard, and most years that person was Asian American. When I moved to California as a graduate student, I was surprised to find out that over 40% of Asian Americans in higher education enroll not at places like Harvard, but at community colleges. Great places to get an education, but less in alignment with the stereotype of Asian Americans. I met Asian American high school dropouts, Asian Americans who never went to college, and Asian Americans who started college but left. As I started doing research, I encountered story after story of Asian Americans who had been put on academic probations but never told their parents, or Asian Americans who left college and need a second or third chance of getting a degree. And if I had been a little bit more aware growing up, I would have noticed that there was growing economic diversity in my local Korean immigrant community in the Midwest. Beyond the bubble of my peer group, many of the Korean American kids in my hometown came from working class backgrounds, and definitely not everyone went to college. So this is by Julia Park. Okay, so it's from an article called Uneven Playing Field, the complex educational experience of Asian Americans. So, and with that, I think we should talk about this, the problems with the model minority. So because when you look at the aggregated data, it seems that the Asian Americans are doing very well. So and they are usually used as a model minority to say that this is how minority should be. The fact that the fact is that the high achievement of Asian Americans, besides the data being aggregated, it also has a lot to do with the U.S. immigration policy. Because after the Chinese Exclusion Act that stopped immigrants from East Asia for many years, when it was repealed in 1965, in the Immigration Act that has a preference for educated immigrants with technical backgrounds that have created this appearance of the model minority. This model minority myth is erroneous and dangerous. It ignores the broad diversity, and the images of the well-behaved citizen, submissive type, keep your head down is so, it's just such a stress for many kids and many people to bear. Like, you're not supposed to be out loud or be bad, and I feel like each time I have to really tell people to persuade people to come out. Historian Erica Lee, who wrote The Making of Asian American, pointed out that the term was actually created to divide minorities. It also pits different type of Asians against each other, and it also or against Asian Americans of different education levels. So this is really harmful for us. And if here, this on the left, you can see this basic thing about what's a model minority myth is. It relies on good stereotypes of a community as a way of erasing bigotry they face. You know, this is very common among groups that were deemed as being too good to be marginalized due to stereotypes regarding socioeconomic status, as with Jewish American as well. So the problem with the model minority is that it is too simplistic model of success, you know, and also when the problem and solution fall entirely on the individual students, as if you just work hard and you will succeed, then systematic issues such as what gets taught, how resources are allocated, and who gets left behind become secondary and never got taught. Here's a quote from College Board's Asian American and Pacific Islander Facts, Not Fiction. How does it feel to be a solution? For students and parents, educators, and policymakers who struggle with widening disparity in K-12 preparation and higher education in a demanding global society, it is tempting to look for a simplistic model of success. For many educators, as well as for the public at large, Asian American and Pacific Islander students have often become that simplistic model, the high-achieving minority who proves that with hard work, any student can accomplish anything, and those who don't have only themselves to blame. And then there's a couple problems that I just mentioned, that as we just talk about that, the teachers would think that students will excel on their own, and then as a result, there's not enough research done, like a lack of studies for teachers, counselors, and policymakers to understand the difficulties and problems. So that's tied back to earlier when I mentioned that I was asking support, math support for the teachers, and then you know, I don't think I think that the teacher was reminding me what to do kindly, but they just don't have the training because it was not backed by the research how to deal with a situation like that. And also with the model minority, the situation of the communities with high levels of poverty and academic barriers were masked. So here's also another story about the invisibility and as well. In the summer of 2008, when interning at the law firm in Washington, D.C., I attended a book signing hosted by the then Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. I had a chance to briefly chat with him during cocktail hours and threw him what I thought was an easy question. Justice Scalia, do you foresee any Asian American justices on the bench anytime soon? After a pregnant pause, he chuckled and said, you don't hear too much about that. Oh, you hear about Asian Americans, that too many of them at UC Berkeley, he laughed, perhaps not seeing the look of shock on my 23-year-old face. I responded, well, that might be true, but we are underrepresented in the legal profession. He followed up, you should do something about that. You should take action. Not to be deterred, I said, well, I'm trying. I'm Asian American and in the legal profession. What else do you expect me to do? There was an awkward pause, and as he started turning away, he said, isn't there someone named Elaine Zhong? Doesn't she do something? Someone nearby said, yes, Elaine Zhao. She's Secretary of Labor. I share the story not to disrespect Justice Scalia. In fact, I applauded his honesty and appreciate the dialogue. But Justice Scalia dealt with the most important legal issue in our country, where at the time, more than 13 million Asian Americans lived. How could we merit so little conscious attention? Were we that invisible? Were we doing something wrong? Was it us? Was it me? This is by Mei Sun on Stanford Magazine. So there was a lot of things about, like said about Asian American and education. About here is, as I explained, is that there's all this immigrant upward mobility and also about the immigration policy change. But with that, you also come to tiger parenting myth and the push for extracurricular, etc. And usually when people are discussing these questions, they do not separate like the capital and social capital versus the cultural capital that families of social families of different social economic levels may have. And with Asian American itself, like affirmative action has become a debate. And I believe that we should support affirmative actions because it also support other groups, and it also supported the students in need in our own group. So then I want to go back to my journey a little bit about what happened afterwards. So in May 2021, after we did the Stop Asian Hate rally, at that time, I still do not feel like I need an Asian American organization. But in May 2021, a fifth grader in our school district received a death threat email, and it's like what we are afraid happened. Even though the school district said it was just a joke, it was an email sent to the wrong place, and we want to have things in good faith. But we still feel like we as a group needed a support at that time. And so that's when the student's parent, Fan Zhang, she's probably here today, and maybe she can talk a little bit more afterwards in the reflection and Q&A. And she and I and Noriko Kantake, and Galia Williams, a few of us founded Asian American Alliance to engage in community service that increase belonging and advocates for social justice. So we hold friendship building events, and we participate in OU Homecoming, and then we are also doing history workshop. So let me show you that what we did, because we want to we want to increase our visibility. So yeah, here is the history of that. And then beside the things I mentioned, we also urged Athens City School District to issue a statement supporting the AAPI community. And we are also in the Racial Health Equity Coalition of Athens County, and in collaboration with Athens Parents for Racial Equity to help increase service to the Asian American community locally. So, and for our Asian history, American history project is that when we hear Asian American history, we often hear about what happened in the West Coast and in the East Coast as if something in the middle, like people don't know much about it. But we actually has a couple of famous Asian Americans, such as from Athens, there's Maya Lin. She's a world-renowned architect. And there's Atu Gugwandi. He is influential in our country's health policy. And then there's also a couple of them that spent their childhood in Ohio, such as, just give me 1 second. Such as, I don't know if you have read a novel, it's called A Little Fire Everywhere by Celeste Ning. And also there's a couple Asian American congressperson, like the Congressman Ted Lieu. He spent his childhood in Ohio, and the celebrity chef Ming Tsai, and he had published several books and was a PBS show host. And his family still has the restaurant in Dayton, Ohio, and yeah, but these are like really rarely mentioned. So for Athens, as I mentioned, there's the cherry blossom along the river. And when we really talk to the Asian Americans in our town, then we realize that Dr. Sushila Gugwandi, the mother of Atu Gugwandi, was the first woman doctor in the area. And then the late Professor Tong founded the Forensic Science program at Ohio University, and also the Women into Science and Engineering program to encourage schoolgirls to enter STEM professions and run school district fair. And that was quite the program has been around for 30 and 40 years, and that has helped many students and particularly girls in these areas into the science profession. And there's also the Dr. Mao Yi, the Burmese American and founder of American Bento Association. And of course, there are everyday heroes. In fact, if you really look carefully around the state of Ohio, it's almost like every small town of certain size will have an Asian restaurant. So, but then the thing is that you're not going to see it in the state's map of where Asian American lives. The map show that Asian American lives mainly, in college towns and in the major cities. But that was not the experience when you drive down the highway. So there is apparently this kind of invisibility exists there, and also there's the nail salon owners and a lot of small business owners as well. And the reason why we want to do a local oral history project is that once when I took my kid up to Columbus, to the Ohio History Center, so we went through the standard Ohio history, with the pioneers and the Underground Railroad and all these things. Then we came to the window of the Asian Americans, and in one way I feel being included, but unfortunately there was like only a Japanese fan in there at that time. I think recently they have increased the exhibit, incorporating more images of like Chinese schools in Cleveland or in Asia town. But I feel like the representation really did not say a lot about Asian Americans living in Ohio, such as like there's a big Japanese community in Columbus, or there's Korean communities in Columbus and in Cincinnati as well, as if none of these exist. And so that's why I feel like I really encourage people to know about and to talk about the Asian Americans in your town, and and to include them in your town or in your town's history and all these things. So, and I think with these, I want to just mention about the stereotype of being perpetual foreigners. It was because, the Chinese Exclusion Act that stopped the immigration for many years, and so there's like a period of time that there were not a lot of population increase, and then so it sounds like every people are immigrants, but actually for Asian Americans, it was only in the 1980s that are more foreign-born Asian Americans than locally born. So apparently there was quite a number of early history that were being bypassed, and with these two together, that is really not good for this climate of for the recent climate with the coronavirus pandemic, and also probably as our country is facing more global challenges. So I'm just hoping that today's discussion would just, bring some perspective and insight. So let me know if people want to discuss a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Yi-Ting. We are going to invite everyone to ask some questions now, so you can unmute your mics and cameras if you wish. You can use the raise hand feature or just the chat. We are going to be taking questions right now.
Hello, Yi-Ting. This is Robert. Got a question for you. When we first met, you and I were discussing. You brought up being invisible, and you talked a little bit about that during this discussion. Can you expand on that just a little bit more? What that means to you and how it makes you feel?
Well, in a way that you feel you're highly visible, but you're also invisible at that time, most of the time. When you're invisible, is that you feel like not being included in a certain way, and also many first-generation immigrants tend to be living in isolated enclaves, and that's why with our organization we are trying to get people out and then to be more visible. And so I actually can show what, I don't know if you see the homecoming parade. So this is the first time, like in Athens, Ohio, if you look at the Ohio history of Ohio University, we have had Asian presence in Athens, Ohio since 1900. It was like even back in Qing Dynasty, and like before all the modern China history starts. But it was only in 2021 that with Athens Asian American Airlines that we finally made into the homecoming. And so, yeah, let me show it to you. So, okay. All right, I think I put it on Facebook. Okay, and then you're also welcome to follow our groups. And I feel this could be a beginning, and we would like to do more for other parts of the Ohio as well. Okay. So here is, okay, sorry about that. So here is where we were in the homecoming parade.
AAA is the community organization that provides friendship, belonging, advocates for social justice. The logo on the banner features the organization issues AAAA in the shape of 4 hills that represent the landscape of Athens County. Make some noise, ladies and gentlemen, for the Athens Asian American Alliance.
Look at that beautiful dragon. There has been an Asian presence in Athens, fun fact, since at least 1900. 1900, so 120 years of Asians and Asian Americans in Athens, Ohio.
So did you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So it's like we feel like we want to be more visible because somehow it was like history being bypassed a lot, and so that's why we want to take people out. Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we've got some typing in the chat, but we do have a hand raised if you'd like to go ahead.
Is it Galia? Yes.
Yes, hi. I just want to comment on being invisible in Athens, in Ohio. I can relate to so many experiences that Yi-Ting mentioned here, like being a parent of a child in the Athens school district, and just being my personal experiences. But what I want to mention is that Athens is home, like Yi-Ting already mentioned, to Maya Lin, a well-renowned architect who designed Vietnam War Memorial, one of the most visited memorials in this country, a symbol of this country in a way. And it's kind of mind-boggling that the Ohio History Center in Columbus didn't mention that, right? It's just such a huge achievement of anyone, any person of any race, and it's being ignored. So it's just kind of like to illustrate how it's just mind-boggling how invisible we are as a community. That's just I wanted to share this with you all.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, I feel like, you know, every small town has a Chinese restaurant, but we never treat it as it's like, you know, like your local diner, you know. And then 50 years later, the local diner might have a historical landmark plaque outside there, as this used to be the place of that. But I'm not so sure if a Chinese restaurant would get that. So it was just like when you do not think about it and you feel like, you know, you just don't see it. But then once you start to see it, you start to see it everywhere.
Yi-Ting, while we're waiting for the chat to continue typing, I'd like to know where you'd like to take your research further.
Well, right now, I think there are many aspects, but right now we want to do something more local, and actually we are supporting Senator Tina Mahara to push for the teaching for Asian American history in the state of Ohio, because how we tell the stories about ourselves affect how we imagine this community, this state to be. And when all the kids are learning about this history of the state Ohio, I wonder if there could be just a section about Asian Americans. And so that's why I would like to do more history work, and then to do that, and then so that the kids in Ohio history would know that their Asian American classmates are also part of the community in this state.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
I believe Dr. McKenzie has her hand up.
Hi, Yi-Ting. I remember you from the conference. I don't really have a question, but I wanted to say thank you for this presentation today. I learned things I did not know, and your openness and honesty moved me. When you got upset, I understood why. And I want to thank you for that openness. So thanks for sharing with us and sharing who you are. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I think we all have a lot of untold stories as well. Okay. Yeah. I was really thinking about how to organize everything I want to say today, and I feel, wow, my God, I must be crazy to want to say everything in 15 minutes. And then I thought about, well, maybe I'm not going to say things that people can look up on their own or watch, from the PBS documentary. And I actually want to say something more local and more relevant to Ohio, because I feel we are also very different, particularly in rural Ohio. We are very different from being in the big cities. And honestly, our people are friendly here. We don't have a lot of hate crime issues, but that doesn't mean that our kids do not encounter microaggressions. And in fact, we just had a student with us to the State House for giving a testimony about how she's suffered from, microaggressions, like people talking about her eating bats, and all these things at school. And and we brought that voice to the State House. And so that's what I feel like I want to talk more about what we can do locally rather than things that people can find in the internet. But of course, I understand that we probably need to cover some basic ground, but then I have to choose between, all the different groups. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And in the chat, we have a comment. Thank you so much for your work. I am newish, a newish person to Athens, and this presentation helped me more to feel belonged here.
That's what I hope. We could help increase people's belonging and then increase the interactions with the Asian American communities and every community members in our town. I think, as we discussed last time, that in one of Dr. McKenzie's list, that you mentioned diversity is accidental while inclusion is intentional. That line got me think for many, many days. And indeed, it's easy to see, well, you happen to have all these people. But even when we are running the organization, this Athens Asian American Allies, and Athens is a place that it actually has people from all over the country. So we actually have a lot of Southeast Asians, Filipinos, Indonesians, and Malaysian, particularly with Ohio histories, Ohio University history being a Southeast Asian focused, research-focused university during the Cold War era. So there was this plan of allocating resources that OU specializes in Southeast Asia more, while the OSU was more in the East Asian collections, things like that. So there was this history of partnership with Southeast Asian countries, and that have sent in students and also immigrants. And so, yeah, but when we are running the organization, of course, like Chinese immigrants is quite a number, but we really have to make a conscious effort to reach out and to talk to the community leaders and then to involve them and to include everyone else. So that was really inspiring for me. But in the meantime, on campus we now have a AAPI lead and the employee affiliation organization, and also the AAPI student union. So last summer when they came to me and say, hey, we want to start this. And I say, that's great. And there were only 4 of them. And we were all very nervous. We were all very nervous. How many people exactly do we have? But now they are like having more than 60. And I was like, whoa, I didn't even know that we have so many. And then and it's also that their composition is truly diverse. You not only have first generation immigrants, and you have second generation, third generation, and in fact, we also have a large number of racial adoptees, and which is, I think they will have their own narrative and occupy a space in Asian American studies in itself. And that's actually quite that you can see in Ohio as well. But I'm so glad that we now have all these student and employee organizations, and they are truly inclusive, and they're doing better, so much better than us. And so we're really trying to learn from them.
Thank you so much, Yi-Ting. We also have one more in the chat. Thank you very much for the information in the presentation. It got me thinking more about the invisibility issue. I want to thank you once again, Yi-Ting, for coming in. It was truly an illuminating talk. And I also want to let everyone know that there is a survey in the chat. We'd love for you to fill it out. Let us know what you're looking forward to in future events, how this event went, and I will also be emailing this link to you after the Teams ends. So if for any reason you can't grab it in the chat, look in your email box for that survey link. Thank you so much, Yi-Ting. It was a wonderful experience.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.